Welcome everyone to our first research edition of the Wellness by the Water Cooler. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we are all joining on from today. And I would like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders joining us today, and also acknowledge the sovereignty that has never been ceded. So feel free to put into the chat the names of the lands you are joining us on from today. And also just to note at the end, there will be about 10 minutes for questions. If we don't get to your question, or if our beautiful research team and advisory team who are also on the chat today aren't able to answer that, just be sure that all those answers will be collated at the end. And Ross and I will sit down over a cup of tea and go through some of those questions to be able to answer them in the follow-up. So everyone's question will get answered. Now, today we are talking about our famous, the SuperFriend 5-domain framework. What is it, how it's been developed, and how you can easily implement this into your organization. But most of all, why this framework is really important. Joining me today is the SuperFriend's Chief Research Officer, Associate Professor Ross Iles. Now, Ross is the chief researcher, is driven to have a positive impact in health and well-being, on the health and well-being of as many people as possible. This started out working in a direct fashion in the physiotherapy practice. And then he's moved on to the research focused on when people are ill or injured and unable to work. So after years of on working on ways to support people after a work-related injury, he's now dedicated to developing the evidence around preventing work having a negative impact on mental health. He's determined to give employers the information they need to help their employees thrive at work. Ross is also my lovely neighbour, so I literally drive him around the bend 24/7. He's a great bloke, and I'm really excited to be talking to you today on this platform. Welcome, Ross.
Thanks, Nat. Point of clarification, we live on the same street, so fortunately I'm not actually next door neighbours with Nat. It is a little up the road, so there is a little bit of peace that comes my way at the end of the day. But no, I love working with you, Nat.
Oh, thanks, Ross. So look, that's probably leads into one of our domain scores anyway, connectedness, which is just so important, that I think that we have a very strong bond in that way as well, Ross. But look, let's start with the basics. Can you tell us about how the 5-domain framework came to be?
Yeah, if people sort of want to know a bit about the history, I guess, of the Indicators of a Thriving Workplace survey, they can get our Decade of Data report that we released last year. If you go to SuperFriend's website, you'll find it there, and we might even be able to post it in the chat. I think that was something we could have sorted out earlier, but I just thought I'd spring that. But basically, around about 10 years ago now, SuperFriend actually sought to, I guess, sort of solidify some of the thinking and the research around, well, what are the really important factors about work and mental health at work that are really important? And it's kicked off for SuperFriend, I guess, a 10-year journey now of actually developing what are the things about workplaces that we need to know about, that we can actually look to make sure people have the ability to thrive at work. And what that's grown into now is that we've had more than 70,000 Australian workers have contributed to the data that we hold around what are the factors at work that actually have a really important impact on how people are feeling at work and their mental health and their well-being. And it's turned into like the largest national survey of factors at work. And we'll talk a little bit later about this, Nat, I'm sure, but we've continually evolved what we're measuring in that survey and what we're able to capture. But there's no point having a massive survey that has lots of people involved if you can't communicate the findings, or if you can't actually pull something out that's important for workplaces to be able to grab onto and actually go, well, this is what we need to do to actually make sure people have the best working environment possible. And really, that's what we've focused on. And what has emerged out of this survey are our domains of a thriving workplace. Now, initially, there were 4 domains, and then, like I said, it continued to evolve into 5 domains. And then in 2022, we actually, went wider, if you like, than we ever had before. We did a literature review to make sure we were capturing, what are the most contemporary findings from the research coming out in terms of influencing health at work. And we added that into the survey. And so we actually measured more than 100 different things, or different concepts or different themes that can actually impact health and well-being at work. And we got nearly 10,000 people completed that, 10,000 workers in Australia, representative across industry, gender, age, etc. And what we went through a process called factor analysis. We actually look at all of those 100 plus factors. Which ones actually stick together? Which ones are actually measuring the same thing? And using that statistical approach, we actually identified our current 5 domains. But one of the best things that we can do, because we actually do endeavour to capture such a large sample size, is we're able to split that sample up into what we sort of use as an identification sample. So what does this part say? What are the clumps in that part? And then you can go ahead and you can test it in the remaining sample. So not only do we have this data-driven process to identify these 5 domains, but we're able to test it. Does it hold in a whole new bunch of people? And that's what we've done to develop our current 5 domains. I know we're going to talk about them in detail in a second, but we've really used that data-driven approach, cast the wide net, and then bring it together into something that is easy to communicate and easy to understand. And the way that we do that is we use numbers. And quite simply, the higher the number, the better things are. And so when we have these multiple questions that make up a domain, we can actually give people a score based on their response. And that means we can add up all the scores from people from a certain industry. We can add up the scores from people all around Australia. We can then pull apart the scores for those who are younger or older in different work roles. And everything that we actually the other information we start to collect, we can actually look at those numbers and how those numbers differ between different groups. And so that actually gives us a comparison, and we're able to set benchmarks. So what's the average across Australia? What's the average for a particular industry? What's the average for Gen Z workers, or what's the average that you see in people who identify as neurodivergent? And we can actually, it enables us to look at numbers that are they're much easier to grasp than actually having to think, well, what are the responses to 50 different questions? We can actually quite simply and easily give people a number, a benchmark, to be able to compare how are different groups doing? Are they doing better or worse than whatever the benchmark might be?
Mm.
And that's where frameworks are really important, because they help you to understand, I guess, and summarize a lot of information, a lot of factors, but they also help you understand, well, where do those things differ? And when you have the depth of data that we do have, that you can actually dive into where are the important differences. And for SuperFriend, we really see those differences starting to emerge when we look at different industries and how those different industries are performing across those 5 domains.
Yeah.
So I guess I better tell you what the domains are, Nat.
That's what I was going to ask you, Ross. And I think, look, but it is true, isn't it? Is that we just don't take that overall snapshot when we're looking at these 5 domains and it's one score. To be able to break that down by industry is so important. And this is probably also the strength of our framework, is that it's bespoke. And we'll, as I said, we'll get into that later in the chat, but it is really important that how you've actually shown that you've highlighted that, and year on year, the strength that we're kind of pulling that through to create that consistency of testing is also really important around those, having a robust psychometric framework.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned psychometrics. If people are interested in the details, we can tell you how reliable our scales are. We can tell you Cronbach's alpha. We can tell you the eigenvalues that actually, mean that they're actually clumped together. So you can actually score them. We have all that information. We don't often communicate it, because sometimes it means people, either get bamboozled by it or get lost in that detail a lot of the time. But we're always happy to talk, those niggly details whenever people are interested.
And it's nice to know the behind the scenes though, isn't it? And for those exactly who are interested, but I think that, what do we show off? What are the five domains, and even how do we color them?
Well, it's part of also, communicating. We're responsible. We collect such a broad amount of information, and we have a responsibility to communicate it in a way that's sensible, but that then is also based on, sound data and research rigor behind everything that we do. So when we talk about our domain, so if we talk about capability, capability is the one domain that has 7 different questions. There's 7 questions that the data says these are measuring effectively the same thing. And capability is really focused on when you look at the questions that are inside that those 7 questions, it's all about the ability of the workplace to actually support mental health. So the level of training that people have, whether there are barriers to accessing confidential support. So it's kind of it's real world support. It's not just a policy, and that's what I really like about the process that we've gone through. It's actually coming down to, well, this is the stuff that actually matters and goes together. We also measure the part of the things that we do collect from people is whether policies are in place, but the data has told us that those things don't connect necessarily to the outcomes. It's actually much more important to measure those 7 questions that are part of capability that tell you about the real world stuff, whether there are barriers. You might have a policy, but if someone feels like, it's not confidential, then, one tells you the real the real situation, and one tells you, well, you're part way there. I'll go through the other domains. I might as well. So we have another domain called connectedness, and the questions that there are 10 questions in the connectedness domain that all go together, and they're really about the relationships at work, how people treat each other at work, whether they perceive that people are nice to each other. Nice is a summary, but it's how people behave around each other at work. And we actually find that it's one of those things that is actually protective around psychological distress, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But connectedness and how people actually relate to their colleagues at work is actually really, really important. Yeah. And it's important to pull that out. And that's what a framework like this does. It actually calls out, well, those relationships are actually important. It's not just something that is a nice to have. It's actually really important for people's mental health at work. Our leadership domain is very clearly focused on, well, what's leadership like at work? Not just in terms of, do they actually support people? Do they give people what they need to get the job done? But are they actually supportive of mental health? Do they understand when people are having difficulties? Do managers look after their own mental health? And certainly in some of the work that we've done in some sectors is, the managers, they're working so hard, they just don't have time to even look after themselves. And people notice that, and it's actually part of that leadership is demonstrating care for yourself. If you're a leader, that's actually has an important impact that filters down to other people in the organisation. We have one of our domains is called safety, and I just need to point out that it's deliberately called safety, not psychological safety, which is a different concept. So our safety domain is actually really focused on protection against bullying, harassment, and violence at work. So safety is the right term there, and it does focus on whether there are policies and that there are processes to avoid those things happening, and then action steps in place as well. So it's not just we have a zero tolerance approach. It's actually enforced as a zero tolerance approach, and there are actually processes that minimize the chances of those things happening. And the final, our 5th domain is work design. And often when you say work design, people think, it's whether I can work from home or not. And this is a benefit of having a framework that has multiple questions in it. Yes, there's that question about being able to work flexibly, but there are also questions in there about terms of deciding how and when you do your work, and are there enough gaps or enough breaks for you to recover sufficiently. So it's really about how is work set up and designed to actually enable people's mental health. And where I think this is really important to have a framework like this is it calls out these things are kind of universal, that they actually operate across different industries. And in the data, there are statistically significant differences. That is, there are scores that are higher and lower across different industries. But industries do some of these things better than others. And that's useful in two ways. It means that there are industries that can do it really well. So they can be examples that you could look to. Are there initiatives in those industries that you could tailor to other industries? So that's important because you can look to where it's working well. But where it's also important is it tells you that probably how you're going to respond to these particular domains. So if we take connectedness, we said that's a really important factor at work. If you want to improve connectedness, how you would go ahead, how you would do that would look very different in a hospital where you've got lots of people in one place, very busy. They need to be at that location because that's where their patients are, compared to other end of the spectrum, transport, where you've got people on the road, you've got people in massive warehouses, and how you actually foster connections and the relationships between people, how you would do that is actually really quite different. But it's still important in both industries. And we do see differences in scores across our domains in different industries. So it's important to recognize, I think, that different industries perform differently, but then how you would actually look to intervene will actually be quite different based on the industry and the pattern of industry. But then also even workplaces within an industry could look very different. And that's where it's really important to understand, well, a framework is actually meant to sort of give you a bit of guidance and of what areas are important. And having numbers sort of gives you an idea, but it gives you the opportunity then to go, okay, well, how do we actually apply that into what we're doing, day in, day out, and to make sure people are have the best working environment possible.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm talking too much, Nat. I feel like you need to throw some questions at me.
No, I love it. I love it, Ross. And I'm hoping everyone's also really appreciating, that to be able to understand, where the five domains came from. Like, I suppose the relatability of that, but then also how to interpret each of these domains across different industries is also really important. So what you've also recognized is that it's a great place to start, and that's what we're trying to also encapsulate, is that why don't we actually just start with an indicator, like where does your industry lie? Like, what are we actually seeing that there could be some levels of, further opportunity. And I think that also is that you did mention, that we've got a set of numbers. So we've got an ITW that goes out, which is approximately 100 questions whenever we go out to test. But
more than that. Yep.
More than that. Okay, so now it's I can't always keep up with the research team. I'm learning just as much as everyone else is as well. So, but it's we've also got 60 to 70 questions that are wrapped around other areas to be able to determine what are the drivers that can create opportunity, and what else do we capture, and then what the relationship is here. We discussed before that is sometimes it's like, oh, of course there's going to be a relationship. When we see one domain going up, we're going to be seeing maybe even psychological distress. So you said before with connectedness, when we see a high level of connectedness, we're more likely in the industry to see a lower level of distress. But those are also scales that we integrate within the ITW, that have also then stand alone with their own psychometrics as well, they're very well entwined. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I think with our beautiful team, we've actually got even an infographic that we can put in the chat that Ross can talk to.
I think there's a challenge putting the infographic in the chat. I think there's like an image limit, but if people do want to see that
we'll send
that
it around.
Infographic is in our 2022 report. So yeah.
Okay.
So I think I might do a bit of a roundabout answer to what you've just said, Nat, in terms of response, because one of the things when you measure a lot of stuff, when you've got a lot of data, then it's really possible to get lost, or you can get lost in having so much, or you can get really fixated on just one particular part. And it's one of the things that I've always been, I guess, really comfortable or satisfied with our domains framework is that it doesn't do anything unexpected.
Mm.
And what I mean by that, and you mentioned it a little bit before, in terms of in particular populations, when you expect things to be more difficult for a particular group, and we do measure vulnerable groups in many different ways. When you identify those groups and you would expect that their scores to be lower, they usually are. And um, so there's a sensibility that is very consistent through the five domains framework, and it's consistent over years as well. So that's something that is actually extremely reassuring in terms of when you're in the research, that you're actually going, well, things go up when you think they would go up, and things go down when you think they go down. And when things should stay stable, they generally do. So that's one thing that I'm constantly reassured with the data and the analysis that we do. And it also gives you confidence that when you do see differences between groups, that those differences are real. And you can identify, well, that's an area where perhaps we need to be doing something, and whether that doing something is intervening or developing policy, whatever it might be, but it's supported by the data. The other thing that I think of when you were talking before is our five domains framework fits in very nicely with other frameworks as well. And I think in particular of the protect, promote, and respond framework, that our five domains fit there very nicely in terms of, particularly in the promote aspect, in terms of promoting the positive components of aspects of work, where we're really identifying what those positive aspects are and actually highlighting them a lot of the time. But there is the protection component, and it reaches into respond briefly, but it is very much more about what's the environment like before before there's the requirement to respond if someone is particularly having troubles with their mental health. When you see how these things, how our framework matches the other framework, it's another aspect that gives you a lot of confidence in terms of, well, this is a useful framework. It focuses very much on how we communicate to workplaces to give them anchors to deal with the numbers. And so when you see those things fitting nicely, it's actually, there's a robustness that you get from the 10 years of data, the fitting with other frameworks, and then also the data analyses that go on behind it. And that sort of leads me into, I guess, the infographic that you were talking about. The things that you expect to come out, if our five domains framework, is robust, is legitimate, you'd actually expect it to correspond with outcomes that are important in the workplace. So it's not just a theoretical thing, but we measure particular outcomes that are important to the workplace, like psychological distress, using a validated tools that appear in the ABS surveys, etc. And when you measure a lot of data, you have a responsibility to not just look at one thing. You need to look at how things vary with each other, because we know workplace mental health is multifactorial. And so you need a multivariate analysis. You need to look at multiple variables to identify what things are actually contributing to those outcomes. And when we look at psychological distress, connectedness is an independent predictor of psychological distress, our connectedness measure, and it's protective. So the higher your connectedness score is, the lower your psychological distress is. But that's only one of our domains. And what we see across the outcomes of burnout, absenteeism, productivity, and intention to stay, which is important for employers when you've got employees, you want them to stay, that our domains are independent predictors of those outcomes. And there's a nice pattern, there's a mixture across the domains. Because if all five domains were predictors of those outcomes, and if they're all predicting it, you're kind of going, well, you should be able to squish them together rather than have five different ones. Mm. But what we actually see is different domains are independent predictors of different outcomes. So, for example, burnout, work design, safety, and leadership all contribute to that outcome. But in that multivariate analysis, connectedness and capability are separate. They're,
Yeah.
they're not contributing. It's much more important to have your work design, your safety and leadership scores supported. But capability is actually an independent predictor of productivity and intent to stay. And so it's another element that underlines the importance of the framework, because it's why you need five, basically, because they're all related to different outcomes in different ways. But I'm going to throw you a question, Nat, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely,
We
Ross.
measure lots.
Yeah.
We measure heaps, and sometimes it could be a criticism of research that all the research does is sit around and admire the problem. It's great to dig deep into a problem to understand. Yes, it's important, but your SuperFriend's chief mental health advisor, basically, we keep diving into this data and trying to give you this information. How do you go about turning that into actually doing things and actually giving people the actions they need to improve workplaces?
And this is probably the strength of where SuperFriend has really started to lead into, especially over the last few years, since we've been there together as execs as well, Ross, is that it's all around that research translation. Is that what does this actually mean, not just to workplaces as a one size fits all approach, but then also to workplaces from an industry lens. So this is where we really wanted to be able to, yes, as you just said, not sit back and admire the problem and just be that another awareness snapshot of the domains, just to take the temperature of Australian workplaces. We want to be able to provide that advisory on, well, what do we now do? And this is where SuperFriend have really taken on, and we talk about this a lot, the interrogative lens. It's not about what can we do, it's also about how can we do it. But Ross, you did mention is that our five domains, they're supposed to be relatable. We even color code them to even use that level of psychology, so people are really understanding. We want to create this as a simplistic framework that people don't feel overwhelmed by, because there's such small little tweaks that any workplace can do of any size across any industry, that can actually start to change these scores. And so that's the power of that there. And what we're also wanting to move away from is exactly what you were saying in safety, is that safety is not always the best indicator for intent to stay. And it's also, not always the best indicator even for the productivity. We can be looking at that capability score there. And we are moving beyond the tick of the box, aren't we? Because when we can have all these systems and processes put in place within a workplace, that doesn't necessarily mean they're working. And we need to actually ask why. So this is where our framework across any industry is able to be able to be that start off point. And that's where we really want to be able to have that flexibility. You spoke before about the differences between work design in transport compared to like say more of a white collar role, where some people that work design is not flexible at all, because transport have to be on the road, healthcare have to be within the hospitals or within the clinics, teachers need to be within the school-based setting. But what else can we actually do? And so this is where the advisory is able to work with what is actually going to be relatable to that industry. And not only that, it's then by being able to say how, and what is going to be achievable in that time. So something else that we're really focusing on, especially as we move, and a lot of workplaces are looking at embedding our framework into their wellbeing strategy, and this also goes with our key stakeholders and certain associations. We need to create that level of sustainability, because we understand as well that workplaces are not the way they were, or they're very different now than they were 5, 6, 10 years ago, and we need to be able to move with the times. So being able to create that framework and that advice that is going to be not only bespoke to industries, but then also to be bespoke to the workplaces, if that we have that malleability, and that is going to be able to lead into having those strategies and those actions be able to I suppose be embedded within the workplace is something that we're really cognizant of. So I think that it's something like we all know, with leadership that, we can equip leaders to recognize, distress and encourage the open communications. But it's about how we do that. And we're going to be doing that. We can go in and implement this and we can talk about that. But if we're not actually addressing who we're talking to by way of industry, that could actually just be a very big well-being washing effect. Oh, the tick of the box. Oh no, we'll put our leadership through training, but was it relatable to you? So we need to be really mindful of that. And it's the same with work design, that we need to align, our work structures, with some mental fitness principles, and try to ensure the autonomy and the flexibility and reasonable workload exists. But that's going to be different between different industries. We want to be able to modify the job roles and reduce burnout and absenteeism. But one strategy is not always going to work with, one strategy in education may not work with the same style of strategy in retail even. So we're just got to be really mindful of that there. And I think as well as what we're looking at even with the new launch of our indicators of a thriving workplace, the next edition in 2024, what we captured is that we've added an extra layer. And I think this is really important, again, for advisory, where we're being able to do seasonal capturing. So we've done four different stages across the year, and we've got over 12,000 respondents this time. Is that about right, Ross? Yeah, 12,000.
That's right.
We're starting to move even more so into that, I suppose that prevention lens, but even as that prediction lens. We're going to add another P onto that model, Ross. So this is where we're able to start to see where might be the decline or the increase of one of the domains or even one of the clinical outcomes. And we can actually literally now and we have the insights or the indicators to be able to see, well, where's going to be best time to intervene. And it's not all about just intervening, say, before, based on the organization, based on the industry, where we can see stress points, which obviously, depending upon different industries, we're going to see different stress points based on their products and services, right? We can start to see the decline on one end, but then where's the support on the other end? And so you bring back capability, which obviously is my bread and butter from who I am and what I've been doing for many decades now. It's still the lowest scoring domain. And it's something that, we really want to be able to shine a spotlight on, because we can always feel like we can prepare our workplaces. And then we have the situation, the instant we've got over it and we feel great. But then we can also now start to see within, the new report, the decline of capability scores post the situation. So there's so much that the ITW can tell us by way of how we can then translate that into some great strategies to be able to utilize.
And just something I need to point out, that the ITW in 2024, we've got more than 13,000.
Okay.
Got a quick fact check in the background.
Oh, I love that. So I suppose that, what I want to even throw back again to you is how we then can test that, because we look at, what we've been doing by way of this indicator from a national perspective and then from an industry lens. But what about a workplace lens? What tool can you, has the research team actually now evolved and created and built for our SuperFriend partners and the workplaces under our from the super funds that support us? What can they actually get?
Yeah, so we've recognized that to capture that, what's happening at an individual workplace, the ITW, the indicators of a thriving workplace, the survey is too big. Right? It's designed to actually give you that overall snapshot. It's designed to be the high level, but that wasn't, you can't just say to the workplaces, well, go and fill this out, all the 20, 30, 100 people, however many people are at their workplace. It takes 30 to 40 minutes to fill it out. It's not going to fly. So what we were able to do, we were able to, again, taking a data-driven approach, what's the smallest set of questions that represent the greatest amount of variance across particularly our domains and some of the psychosocial hazards that we measure? What's the smallest set of questions you can ask, but still capture the breadth of responses that people have? And we've put that together into the Thriving Workplace Index survey, which is designed for workplaces. It takes less than 10 minutes for workers to fill it out. And it is able to connect, and quite strongly, and we've done the analysis in the background, to the national and industry benchmarks for your workplace. So it's 10 minutes for your workers to fill it out. And you can then actually see where that workplace sits relative to those national and industry benchmarks across the 5 domains, even with psychosocial hazard scores. But then also get a bead on what are the levels of psychological distress or burnout in your workplace, and what proportion of your employees actually would say your workplace is mentally healthy. So we've done the analysis, the research, to actually identify what's the best set of questions that you can ask. So the burden on the workers is decreased, but you can still get some really valuable information for you to be able to respond. Do you need to focus on training your leaders in those conversations that you mentioned before? Or do you need to be a bit more deliberate about how you foster connectedness in your organization? Do you actually need to take, specific steps? And that's where we work together nicely. Our 2 parts of SuperFriend, to actually go, well, here's what the data's saying, and how do we help workplaces respond?
Yeah, so it's a really powerful tool, and I think that our beautiful team in the chat has actually provided some links into asking and learning a little bit more about the Thriving Workplace Index. And it's exactly what you said, Ross, is that we can have that indicator, which we have as the largest report. We're able to then hone in on what your workplaces actually need, and what that does, it reduces that guessing game, but it also then allows for you to have a deeper understanding about your workplaces and how much that actually really assists. But probably one last thing which I like to mention as well around the benefit of the Thriving Workplace Index, and how the research team have built this to be something that's a really easy, again, something that it can be implemented very, very simply across the teams, across different divisions, even across different states, from a national level. But being able to then take into consideration where those strategies can then be implemented, and having those points of time throughout a 6 to 12 month time stamp to create that change and to measure, or to see where that change is going. We have the power to come back in and to retest, and that's where we can start to see those changes and that difference. And that's a really important piece. Tell us a little bit why retesting is important, Ross.
Well, you need to know if what you're doing is working, basically, and it takes a lot of effort to, particularly, I'm thinking of relatively small employers. You're busy just doing the work stuff, and so sometimes it feels like, and I'll get to it whether it's actually true or not, but sometimes it feels like, well, having to sort of do the workplace mental health stuff is a distraction from the doing stuff that is actually, the business that actually gets in the way of the work. So you want to make sure that you're actually getting some benefit from doing that. But by the way, the research tells us that, when our domains are higher, people rate themselves as more productive, and those sorts of things. So it's actually not distracting. It's actually helping people to do the job better. It's a win-win. But it's important too to actually go, well, if there's effort required to do these things, that you actually know that it's working, because you could keep putting in that effort and actually, not actually see the thing that you're trying to address improve. And so that effort's wasted. You could actually put that effort somewhere else. And it's also the benefit of the domains framework is you help to identify your priority areas. If your connectedness is off the charts, well, there's no need to try and foster those connected. You can actually focus on, well, what do we need to do to increase our capability? It is, and we see it consistently as the lowest performing domain. that's where you can actually sink your energy. That's where you can make sure that you're upskilling your staff. You can see that you can help them with their mental health training or whatever it might be. So you can put your effort in the right places,
And
but
that's a
then
perfect
actually see that effort works.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example. If you've got high levels of connectedness, but then low capability, you've obviously then got the level of connection that you trust, and to bring in, what like to ask for the feedback of how they would actually like to see mental health resources and training occur that are going to be relevant to them. So that's actually a great advantage if you've got those kind of domains looking in that level. And this is what we come in and we're able to differentiate is what's going to be able to work based on those domain scores. Now, Ross, because we talk all day and, we also then see each other on the weekend at basketball, we're going to have to wrap up. So you can get back to your research. I'll get back to my advisory. But we really hope this has been a valuable session. If there are any questions that, might ponder even afterwards, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. We love us answering the questions, and even, to have that ability to be able to have a chat if that's also what you'd like to learn a little bit more. But this has been a really valuable session, understanding, the robustness of our framework and where we've been, but also then where we're going to. So we actually have our next chat, Ross, lined up as well. So you can't get away that easily from me on the 19th of March. So hopefully the girls will put that link in where we're going to be discussing the latest indicators of a thriving workplace. And this is where we're also then, capturing, further data and discussion around, neurodiversity and also menopause and other topics for the first time. So it's going to be a great, really fruitful chat, Ross. And,
Really, really looking forward to that, to
yeah.
telling people, what we found when we've dived into this data, measured it, more frequently than anyone else has. We've got some really cool stuff to show, and even then, we'll only be scratching the surface. So if you've got any data questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with us here at SuperFriend.
Yeah, and also what the data can also then show us by extension, through our snapshots and also our deep dives on an industry level. So that's important to remember as well. Thank you so much for attending today, taking your precious time out. I hope you had a nice hot cup of tea next to you while we were chatting away, and hope to see you at the next Wellness by the Water Cooler. Thanks again, Ross.
Thanks, Nat.